Goedemiddag allemaal. Welkom terug op deze vierde webinar dagweek in de webinarweek van Werven en Zipconomy. Goed dat jullie er allemaal zijn. We gaan het in dit webinar hebben over de kracht van data achter succesvolle talentprogramma's. En we hebben vandaag nog één ander webinar en dat is over de arbeidsmarkt. Hoe die weer vooruit moet en niet achteruit moet. Een politieke beschouwing die ik samen met Stef Witteveen ga doen. Morgen hebben we dan onze afsluitende dag die helemaal in het teken staat van Total Talent Management. Nou, en een onderwerp, als je dit onderwerp van dit webinar interessant vindt, dan zitten tussen die 5 webinars waar we de webinarweek mee afsluiten, ongetwijfeld ook nog interessante programma's, onderdelen voor jullie tussen. Dus heb je je nog niet ingeschreven, dan kan je dat alsnog gaan doen. Goed, ja, die data, dat is een heel interessant en misschien ook wel een beetje een nieuw onderwerp, een nieuwer onderwerp. Nou, daar ga ik jullie niet van alles over vertellen, maar daar hebben we 2 experts voor in die dat gesprek ook samen gaan doen. En dat betekent ook dat ik even in het Engels ga overschakelen, want we gaan dat ook wat internationaler doen. So welcome both of you, Wim and Laurence. Good to have you in the program. You're both here, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Brainnet PRO Unlimited. Well, most of the viewers they know Brainnet in the Dutch market very well. The company was bought by PRO Unlimited last year. Laurence, you're new for our audience. How do you see the market and what's going on? You're vice president EMEA. I think that the whole market is very active at this moment.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the invitation. Really happy to be here speaking to everybody. Yeah, the market is growing. It's a very exciting time to be in this particular industry. I think when we look at the globe, the market for the non-permanent contingent workforce is being valued in excess of 5 trillion. And we're seeing growth predictions of 14 to 15% each year. And this particular topic is a very, very important one.
Okay. Well, let's switch to your presentation and your interview. For the viewers, if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat, and then the both of you can answer that during your presentation.
Jan, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Yeah, we're going to talk about data, and more specific, how data we find really important to create and maintain a real successful program. And in our day-to-day operation, we see organizations across the globe facing increasing challenges in managing their non-employee workforces. We see how organizations approach these challenges differently from region to region, from country to country, and from firm to firm, even within a single multinational enterprise. But some fundamentals are universal and cut across different functions and organizations. These includes being able to bring together the required technology solutions, the data analytic capabilities, and the domain and technical expertise required to increase visibility into the workforce and spend, control over costs across the source-to-pay lifecycle, managing compliance and risk and performance management, and of course many, many other topics there. Yeah, we're here today with my colleague Laurence Kirk, which I'm really happy to have in this webinar and talk with him about the importance of data and how we're seeing it driving the most successful talent programs, and more importantly, how organizations are starting with data to support achievement of their goals. And Laurence, to kick it off, at first. In the non-employee labor space, the current conversation seems to include talk around data in some form or another. How do companies access the data they need, and what type of data should companies look for to support their business goals?
Wim, that's a great question to kick us off. Thank you. But actually, if I may, I think first of all, what we need to do is take a look at the entire landscape that we're working in, because this is a hugely important topic. It's touching all of our businesses, regardless of the geographies, whether we're in the Netherlands, we're in Switzerland, or even further afield. Harnessing the power of our workforces has never been more critical. And the organizations that are embracing new ways of doing things, forward-thinking, data-driven platforms are going to be the ones who are going to succeed in our new surroundings. They are going to be the ones who are going to sustain growth. They are going to be the ones who intelligently reduce risk and claw back millions in savings. But critically, the time is now, right now. And not being a part of this new wave really means a choice between being on or not, and subsequently passing your competitors their pick of the world's finest talent. And it's also important to understand that this hasn't just been brought about by the pandemic. This was a seismic shift that was happening 2 to 3 years before the pandemic even was prevalent to all of us. So the rise of remote working has really meant that we've needed to adjust the ways that we think about how we're going to access candidates. The perfect candidate can now be anywhere on the planet. Now, for some, that can be really exciting because we can use data to pinpoint individuals with the exact skill sets that we need. And we never again have to settle for a less than perfect fit because of proximity to the offices or perhaps convenience. So there are, we're going to discuss today some of the pitfalls and what this data landscape looks like. But I'm thoroughly looking forward to the conversation.
Right. And Laurence, is it correct? Hey, there are a lot of data available there in our workspace. There are a lot of data from every kind of sources available. Once you have access to all those data, how do you make any sense of all that information?
It's another really good point. The focus needs to be on the type of data or the type of intelligence. Think about that as the brain, which is going to be powering all of the decisions that we make. And then think about how you're making sure that that information is being integrated into your business and importantly, integrated into all of the applications that you have within your organization. So they could be direct sourcing initiatives. They could be diversity and inclusion based. Ask yourself, how are you using that information to provide actionable analysis that you can make strategic changes to? Remembering, if you have one data layer, it's much easier to seamlessly integrate with all of the other aspects of your business. One data layer to plug into compliance, payroll, candidate curation. Critically starting there with a data layer will mean powering everyone else's work streams and their targets. Now, if we look at the marketplace, we've seen an explosion of services and suppliers all offering data into all manner of categories and subcategories. Quite frankly, there is a long, long list of organizations that you could choose from, all great at doing one thing, but precisely that, only one thing. And in our day-to-day world, this translates then into varying types of information and data, but also varying quality.
All right, that's really interesting. So we have there a whole ocean of information available, and we need to make sure we create that ocean, that one data layer. But on the other end, all that information isn't of the same quality. Do I understand that correctly? There are different levels of quality of those data.
Wim, absolutely, unequivocally, yes. The right data is going to be a rocket fuel that will propel your workforce and it will take you to the next level. At Pro, we've invested really heavily into this, into accessing the world's most current staffing intelligence and global rate information. It's become the cornerstone of our platform, and it's really revolutionized the way that we've approached subjects like direct sourcing. Now, unlike other companies who are scraping data from outdated sources, free web data, public records, surveys that even many of us have participated in at some point. But let's stop for a moment. Let's just think about how many of us on this call are engaged in strategic development of our businesses, business critical decisions that impacts huge sums of money. Yet somehow today, some of us are using data which is out of date before it reaches us. Let's think about the potential scenario where real-time data, real-time global insights, regional insights, and the impact that that would have on our decision making in the moment to make critical choices about how we deploy talent strategies, compensation and benefits, and the subsequent impact that's going to have to our overall value proposition.
Right. Yeah, I find it really interesting, and you get me really up and running right now. And hey, then I have that data ocean available, and I'm able to determine what quality level my data are, etc. But then there's another question, of course, popping up. How can I use all those data in the most efficient way for managing my continued workforce?
There are endless use cases for doing this, okay, but bringing the right elements together can really positively impact things like rate card development, competitive intelligence, compensation and benefits. And the pioneers that I alluded to at the start of the call are using things like a single dashboard to benchmark their own workforce against global data sets. This is where we start to see best in class. This is what best practice starts to look like. They can then identify with that single dashboard and that single layer of data that I talked about, competency gaps. They can launch targeted reskilling campaigns, targeted upskilling, and they can also find the right people to fill those gaps wherever they are in the country or perhaps wherever they are in the world. And because the technology continues to evolve around us as we're using it, it means that your insights continue to sharpen over the time. Now, instead of using data to tell you what you've just done, we'll be able to use this data in a manner that helps us predict what we need to do next, and even model and scenario plan circumstances where pulling different levers will produce different results. And we'll be able to look at those scenarios and determine in advance, using the technology, using the data, the outcomes that we want and the outcomes that we want to drive to. So there are multiple levers that we can pull when it impacts the data, but it's critical importance that you are accessing the right partner, you're accessing the right data type, and how that then gets deployed and dispersed across your entire business.
Right. Yeah, I'm getting really enthusiastic about it because I love working with data and making those choices fact-based. But I would assume we also see some key challenges there for companies when they're going to start working with all those data. What should they be aware of?
Well, should we start with what we're doing right now? I mean, these are great conversations to actually have about the future and what can be done. And many of these scenarios are available to us right now. But before we think about our strategy, where we should go, more importantly, and perhaps worryingly, is how are we making these decisions today? You know, are they based on anecdotal information or worse still, gut feel? The number of organizations that I'm talking to who still have no accurate visibility of spend, they don't have rationalized rate carding, they're not understanding why they're losing talent to competitors in different organizations, different countries. And it seems to me that the data element is missing, and it's such a fundamental part. At PRO, we talk about it being the blood and the oxygen of our programs. It can be the heartbeat of how we deploy strategies. And without it, I think it's probably the first critical discussion point. Speaking to a lot of organizations about their plans for 2022, 2023, how to deploy MSP programs, technology, services procurement. Yet all of this is racing ahead without really understanding where the correct entry point should be. It's understanding what the target impact is. It's really the lack of understanding around how they can support stakeholders. And it feels to me that we run ahead to keep up with the marketplace, over anxious to deploy programs without first understanding exactly where we need to start. It's probably the most common barrier to entry, or the question that I face the most. How do I start? Where do I start? And how do I deploy? And this all centers around the data. So for us at Pro, we often encourage our client partners to just slow the pace slightly. Let's look at conducting some diligence and some data capture, and then some consultancy around how we can build a program which is targeted to those specific requirements. The data, if I may expand a bit further, Wim, is so important that when suppliers and you guys that are watching this today are really carefully considering how we approach that data capture, what we're capturing, who we're partnering with. And our CEO, Kevin, has a rather colorful analogy, and he gave it to me recently, and actually he couldn't be more accurate, but he talks about data being a bit like ice cream. And that ice cream comes in 30 different flavors, and some of them are tastier than others. But also importantly, data does not age well. It does not age well like wine. In fact, data can go off very, very quickly. And not all data is created equally. So for those of you that might be thinking, well, I've got my data, I've secured it, I've had it, I'm trying to feed it in, I implore you to reassess the sources, the frequency, the capture, the methods, because it's going to have a profound impact. But by approaching a more targeted methodology in your data capture, it's going to help organizations build libraries of information, competitive intelligence, hiring trends, skills availability, and perhaps even details on the complexity of markets. So never before has there been a more concentrated focus on data, and probably a more important time for organizations to start exactly there. Don't run ahead. Let's look at the analysis. Let's look at the data, what it's telling us, and then we'll build program, talent strategies, non-permanent or permanent strategies to support that business objective.
Right. Thanks a lot there. And I see already some questions coming through, and please submit your questions if there are any questions from everybody in the audience. We're more than happy to answer them after our second part of our conversation there, Laurence, because we prepared some do's and don'ts if you're going to work with data for managing your continued workforce program. We also have some slides there to support this part of our webinar. But please feel free and submit your questions. We already have some send in. But looking at the do's and don'ts there, Laurence, can you help us there? What do's and what don'ts do we see there?
Yeah, sure. So the do's, okay, it's fairly obvious. You've heard me speaking already about the importance. Everything starts with data, okay? We would not embark on the biggest challenge of our lives or our workforce strategy, or if we look at other businesses and how they target such critical decisions without using any form of intelligence, okay? We, as businesses, we shouldn't be racing ahead without it. Embrace the possible. Data is available in real time. We should no longer have to wait months or a year for data to be captured and processed to us. Data is available in real time. Now, whilst I'm sure not everybody on this call wants to review a rate card on a weekly basis, it does make sense for organizations to review them monthly or perhaps quarterly. The best-in-class organizations that we're working with, in an effort to maintain current market competition and also to maximize efficiency and in some cases savings, are using this data as critical points so that they can baseline where they are at any given time. Ask for sources of data. Okay, this is such an important point of discussion. If your data source is capturing from a small pool, 5, 6, 7, 100 data sources, this is going to bring very little value to you. At Pro, we've invested, as I mentioned, into a data ocean, and we have 1.5 billion data points in our resources and at our fingertips to be able to kind of benchmark this data. And importantly, there'll be people on this call here who are thinking, well, am I just responding to what a computer is telling me or what an analysis is telling me? Well, a really critical point of this is how this is validated. So importantly, capture the data, but also have it validated by local experts. At Pro, we call them skills villages. These are groups of individuals who are in regions within the Netherlands or perhaps other countries that you might be supplying to, and they are validating the data that is produced from all of the organizations that you will capture this from. It's a critical component. We've seen it most in the last 12 months, where organizations were suggesting markups for agencies, or they were suggesting pay rates, and actually on the ground, operationally at the sharp end, the variance was quite significant, and we were able to counter that. So please check the sources and ensure that they're validated. The number of reference points are going to be absolutely critical. Another point, how is it going to integrate into your business? I talked about this earlier, really in terms of how it's presented. An Excel spreadsheet may be of use, but it's not going to be something that you can action in your day-to-day strategy. You want the data to be captured and fed in to your systems, whether that's through your HRIS system, your VMS system, the layer that sits across the top that I talked about. It's really important that you're able to use this in a manner which you can pull levers and drive different objectives and outcomes. The final point, probably for the do's, is just check the small print. Okay, there's license arrangements. The small print will all know the details count. These will be where you can find information about the lifespan of the data, how it's been captured. I saw once a scenario where the data had been stored for 6 months because of regulation in a part of the world before it could be passed on. And quite frankly, having data 6 months old by the time it lands with you, it's not conducive for anybody's business objectives. So please check the small print.
I think there we have all do's and don'ts there, Laurence. So let's look if we dare have any questions from our audience which have dropped in. I find it really really helpful to know this much about the use of data and what could it bring for your program. One of the questions I've seen popping in is all of these are important iterated parts when you're using data, but what do you see as the real game changer, and why is it a real game changer?
The game changer is time. The game changer is real time. So I touched on it on the do's. The ability to be able to have confidence in the decisions that you're making. Okay, if we are making recommendations to CPOs, our customers, our client partners, we're trying to determine our strategy for the weeks, months, and years ahead. The data age is of critical importance to do that. And the ability to have it in real time, which up to now has probably been a big misconception. Organizations have thought it's going to take weeks, it's going to take months for me to be able to capture this data. Think about it in practical terms. Real-time data means that you're going to be able to take actions before everybody else. That will translate into competitive edge. By the time you integrate this with other technologies such as AI or machine learning, you're going to be sourcing candidates quicker, you're going to be matching quicker, onboarding quicker. Things like customer experience, user experience, all round will be improved. This is going to have a subsequent impact on things like not just time to hire, but time to productivity, which many of you will know is one of my favorite discussion points. So the real-time nature just means that we can do things with confidence when it happens. We don't have to rely on manual intervention, manually pulling down data ourselves. The real-time nature means that it's going to have a profound impact. For us at Pro, it has been the game changer.
And well, fortunately enough, there are a couple of more questions dropped in. those are really interesting. Looking at data, are we just looking at temp data, or are we also looking at perm data? And how can we compare those data with one another? And looking at the current workspace, I would assume, of course, we're also looking at perm data, because from perm data we can learn, we can see which trends are there, how pay rates are evolving, how accessibility to talent is there, how profiles are built up, etc. But Laurence, maybe you can give us some more insight on that. How do we use those both types of labor there, and do we compare them?
So let's think about this as being in the business of talent. Okay, it's easy for us to segment. We want to have permanent data, non-permanent data. We can drill down into minuscule detail. We can look at services procurement, SOWs. We can look at rate comparison marks. We can look at price points where there's international impact. Whether this is permanent or contingent, we can look at the entire package together to give us a complete, full view. Very often, organizations are still segregating permanent, non-permanent, some even more so with other categories of workers. But this is really about us thinking about what's the best way to get the work done. If you have a project within your organization, you need to have it done within a period of time, whether it's building an engine, it's working in financial services. We want to do things with the highest possible output to the highest possible standard in the most cost efficient manner. And critically, we want it to happen on time and on budget wherever possible. So using this data is for a full picture of the data is going to help us be able to predict how we're going to be able to do that. We can then start to pull other levers. We have a dynamic sourcing strategy, which means we can look at things like the data tells us we'll be able to manage a project within a specific timeline. Might feel like a small subject, but I think there's a lot of companies on this call today, particularly when it comes to managing consultancy spend, will be very familiar with a storyline that talks about extensions, project overruns, over budgets. If we step back and take all of that data, all of that analysis, we'll be able to build a view on how we can deploy those projects within our business. So the short answer is yes, this is about the business of talent, not just segregating contingent and permanent.
Right, yeah, and exactly what I would expect, what I would assume, and also, of course, what we would like to see. Another really interesting question is, and this is basically about the sources we use. Do we combine our own data with generic market data from a specific country, generic market data from sources, governmental sources, or some like that? And I think we have a great description about all sources we use for each and every market, from our own day-to-day operation, partner sources we use, how we validate those data sources, etc. So, Laurence, I think you have some interesting views on this one.
Yeah, so this is a really good question, okay? This is the question you should be asking everybody that you're talking to about making a data acquisition, because to my comment earlier about the source and the volume of the data sources. Typically, organizations that work in an MSP space, or they'll be a data provider, will be doing exactly as you have just suggested. They'll have a small population of their own data, anonymized supplier data, candidate data, some trend analysis, but the capture has been based on quite a small proportion of either geography or headcount or numbers. When that's added to the free resources that you talked about, that's very often then packaged up as the entire solution. You're still not getting a full picture. Pro does use some of that data, but it represents a very small proportion of how we approach capturing that. within our organization, we have teams of analysts and consultants and a division that spend all of their time focusing on building the rate data, partnering with the very best organizations, the skills villages that can validate locally around the world, and the data points that I mentioned, 1.5 billion and millions of unique jobs, skill sets for us to cross-validate and run comparisons to. So at Pro, we've aimed to build a service for our customers and our client partners where they can have the largest reach globally anywhere than any other organization is going to provide. That's involved a lot of organic growth. It's also involved a number of acquisitions, and it's a product that we'll continue to heavily invest in because we see the importance of it, particularly in the Netherlands and around Europe, which seems to be growing at an exponential rate at the moment. But please, I sense that there might be a question around, what is the right number of data points? That's a tricky one to answer. But perhaps looking at how narrow the capture has been from your supplier, or if it's heavily dependent. If we imagine the circle and a high proportion of that circle is made up of free resources, scraped data, that's not going to be conducive to your organization.
We use, in an answer to that question, we use the local data sources for governmental organization, but we use many more, and therefore they're not that big of a importance in our data ocean. And what does that say about our data maturity for the Dutch market? How are our current data fit for purpose for our day-to-day operations in the Netherlands? I'm really curious about that one, because I think that's also a major question. What is the quality of data, and what quality can I deliver in my operation just locally over here?
Sure. So it's good news for you, everyone in the Netherlands. The maturity of the market there is amongst the highest ranking globally. So there is an abundance of information and there is an abundance of data that can be captured and can be plugged into systems for just about everybody that's on this call. So I can see that there's a large number of suppliers. I can see that there's a large number of client partners and large corporate organizations here. And together there is a wealth of information that you can access in real time. And the skill sets, the job reference points, and the data points for benchmarking, you can also run to compare against your competitors, other countries, other organizations, and you can get very detailed analytics, specifically those who are looking at high skill sets. What do we need to do to improve our compensation and benefits packages? Also, let's look at data around suppliers. Who is charging fair markups and margins within the marketplace? Is there a standardized rate? What are my options as a buyer if I want to have a job done and I'm looking at consultancy spend, agency markup, perhaps redeployment within my existing business? The data can power all of these decisions for you.
There are still popping in questions, so that's great. Keep the flow going on that part.
Try and answer if I can.
Bring it on. One easy question there. Can we use data from Brainnet without using Brainnet as an MSP? And I think the most easy answer on that one is yes, you can. Of course you can. You don't have to use us as an MSP to get those correct data. On the other hand, if you want to get the maximum out of those data and get the maximum effect, I think you need us in any way. But we have multiple solutions there. We have just a data service we can provide. We have platforms you can use to correctly analyze those data. You can include them in your own data ocean. And Laurence, I don't think, what do you have to add on that one?
Yeah, so it's a common question, and we tend to think with the legacy models that we're very, very familiar with. Pro's approach in the marketplace has been very much around integration. Okay, our approach is integrated workforce management. This means for those organizations that are watching this and they're thinking, well, I've got an MSP or I've got a technology system, I don't want to have to shift everything, but I really see the value in the data, then yeah, we can still have a conversation with you. We can act as the organization that captures and interprets all of the data and makes recommendations for you. You can also buy in a traditional manner the products that we offer, Rate Point, and our global hiring intelligence, which is being made available to a number of organizations, not just companies, but recruitment suppliers, large MSP providers that are working. Some of you are on this call today, are using the services of Rate Point to power what they're able to offer to their organizations, and makes the overall value proposition for everybody that much more great. So yes, please, it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. It doesn't have to be a big bulk purchase. Pro's approach is very much what you need, how you need it. The platform enables you to be able to extract wherever you are in the world, in this instance, the Netherlands, exactly the services that you need. So global hiring intelligence, openly available.
News, I think. Yeah, this is an interesting one because I haven't seen the film. Have you seen the film Don't Look Up? And Laurence, I haven't. I don't know if you have seen it, but I haven't. The question is, are there any downsides on using data? And well, of course, I would assume there is a downside. And I think it's already also really linked to what quality are those data, and as soon as the data are of lower quality, are older, I think the downsides are really obvious. But what other downsides could there be, Laurence?
So I have seen Don't Look Up. I had to think about it for a moment there, and if I'm interpreting the analogy for the movie in the right way, I think we tend. What having data available to us is it creates that hunger for more. And once we've tasted the positive upside of how it's impacting our businesses, we want more, particularly when we're able to see the positive outcomes. The downsides, the desire to have more. And I talked in one of the earlier questions about the technology kind of exponentially improving and it sharpening around us and us be able to do more. I think one of the downsides could be that our organizations are not set up quickly enough to be able to respond to this. So we talk about it as a community. We talk about how we're going to be able to introduce these types of services to our businesses. But actually, if we look at the global landscape, many organizations aren't scaling up to the degree to be able to utilize this type of data. So let me try and make that even more real. Let's think about, I talked about plugging into different technologies and systems that you might have. At Pro, obviously, we have the integrated workforce management that I talked about. That means that one data layer complements everything. Other organizations may be slightly more fragmented. They might not have the infrastructure to be able to maximize the data. I touched on artificial intelligence, machine learning, utilization of things like data to offer speedier payment to the workforces. So I think the downside could be that actually some of those cracks are widened and there's maybe more exposure around areas that we need to focus on. But actually, is that a bad thing? If we're able to identify where we need to perhaps fill the gap, whether we need to improve it, whether we need to revisit it, is that actually a downside? I guess it could be quite subjective, but I don't see that similar to the movie that we'd end up in a similar place.
Okay, I think I need to watch the movie then. Let's find some time there for viewing it. We're getting to the end of our webinar. We just have 4 minutes, but I still see some interesting questions coming in. And one interesting question is, subject matter expert staffing agencies. Would you build candidate profiles based solely on own data, or would you already start with externally bought data sets. And for sure, this is also a real and interesting question, because I think mainly the question underneath is who can use the data that are available, and how can you use it for your own purpose, and how can it be for any value for your own operation and for your client's operation? And I would assume it's not only fit for our clients hiring external staff, but also for the supplier market there. But maybe I'm wrong, Laurence, but correct me then. But
so let's think about earlier on when I talked about it being the brain and the blood and the oxygen that powers everything. Organizations are using data to benchmark where they are. So you might look at your own organization, whether you're a staffing organization, an agency, or you're a large corporate organization. You might want to benchmark exactly where you are today in subjects like tenure, diversity and inclusion. There might be other initiatives that you're looking to deploy. Using the data to understand where you are in this entire segment can be of critical importance. And then comparing that and benchmarking it against other organizations means that you can make more objective shifts in your strategy. Particularly, the primary positive about this is that you're not making decisions based on that gut feel that you perhaps sit around thinking about. We should be doing more of this, or we should be doing more of that as an organization. Let's look at what the entire industry sector in the Netherlands is doing around us. Let's step outside of that and look at the EU. Let's look at the rest of EMEA, and let's find our place within that to see very honestly what we're doing, what our data looks like. That will then drive the initiatives for us to be able to improve and for us to be better organizations and better contributors. Subsequently, as a corporate organization, you can then benchmark, understanding perhaps why profits from other organizations are accelerating at a rate that is perhaps unrecognizable to some others. The data can take us in all different angles. Understanding how to interpret it, having the right intelligence to be able to do it in the first instance is really critical. What I'm pleased about from the question, Wim, is it would imply that actually we're on the call and we're starting to think about how we can apply this information in real time and how we can use it not just for our benefit, but how we can take that message and increase it out to all-round user experience, whether it's internal, external, or client focused.
Yeah, so that's the really great thing I find about data. Hey, we can make fact-based decisions, and not only for our own operation, for our client operations, for our suppliers' operations. And we're at the end of our webinar. Time's up. We still have lots of things to discuss. And we're more than happy to have this discussion with you if you would like. So please let us know if we can be for any service for you there and help you out on this topic and explain more and more about the power of data and the power of data and helping your program moving forward and being the best program there in the market. We're more than happy to join in that conversation. Laurence, thank you very much for joining. Love to have these conversations with you. And we would like to have them especially with you in the audience together. So let's see each other in real life there. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Wim. Thanks, everybody.